Okay, let's get started then. Thank you everyone for joining. So we're here to talk about vibe coding or AI pair. Really, we want to share more about our experiences using AI assistants and some of the best practices that we have uh, been using in our projects, Chris and I, with our teams as well. Before we begin, let's introduce ourselves properly. So I'm Luiz. I'm a principal technologist from Brazil, living in the United States, based in Boise, Idaho. My background is in full stack development, platform architecture, account management, technical strategy. I've been with Thoughtworks for about 15 years now. Chris?
Hey everyone, I'm Chris Kramer. I'm an AI principal on the North America AI data and AI service line. I'm in Denver. My background is more traditional machine learning, data science, ML ops, really focused in natural language processing and document understanding. So really excited to be here and thanks.
All right. So let's get started. And since we're talking about vibe coding, I'll be very transparent. I actually asked ChatGPT for help in putting together the content because, we're talking about AI here. It seemed appropriate, right? So what is vibe coding anyways, right? So according to ChatGPT, vibe coding is a relaxed, intuitive, flow-driven approach to programming rather than meticulously planning. It's more based on a creative rhythm. Um, very good for rapid prototyping, uh, more about the aesthetic and functional solution than about how it's developed itself. And I asked it, okay, so when I'm using an AI assistant doing vibe coding, what is that like, right? So it told me that it's often about describing what you want. The AI generates the code, right? It's more about shaping the intent and reviewing the output, right? It's very iterative, dynamic, conversational. It feels more like improvising with a bandmate than commanding an orchestra. I felt that was a very ChatGPT response, by the way. Um, so it's an agile conversation specification as you go method of programming, right? It's very common, according to ChatGPT, in hackathons, game jams, creative coding, personal projects. It's not ideal for large-scale systems, safety-critical software, and formal enterprise workflows, which, if you think about it, it's really what we do at ThoughtWorks, right? We're much more focused on these types of systems where it says it's not ideal for. Yeah, we do some prototyping, right? As part of our delivery work and so on and so forth. But really, most of the work that our clients hire ThoughtWorks for help with is around these large scale safety critical systems, right? So what does that mean? That we shouldn't be using vibe coding in ThoughtWorks? Um, so I asked ChatGPT again, okay, so what if I want to use an AI assistant in all those projects where vibe coding is not ideal for, right? And the recommendation was, well, bring a human in the loop, right? Do some code reviews with the AI assistant. Make sure that you have mandatory code reviews, use the AI suggestions as draft, make sure that you have code traceability and provenance. It's very essential, right? Use unit tests to kind of like match the what you want, right? Make sure you have tests and that the AI is going to generate code that adheres to that spec, right? Make sure that everything is version controlled and that you have secure development environments and so on and so forth. So here we can extract some themes, right? Like just-in-time code reviews, rapid prototyping, almost like a ping pong style of, I developed a test and then I asked the AI to make that test pass, right? And if you think about it, these are all techniques that come to mind when you're talking about pair programming. So it was interesting for me to have that conversation with ChatGPT because the way that we have been using AI coding assistants feels very much like pair programming, which is different than vibe coding, and that's what we wanted to talk about. But before we jump into that, let's talk a little bit more about how the tooling related to these AI coding assistants have evolved over time and our experience with that. Chris?
Yeah, thanks. So if we all travel back in time for a moment to the pandemic, we remember when these tools first started blowing up, specifically ChatGPT and Gemini were some of the earlier ones. And for those of you wearing our COVID masks who were early adopters, uh, with Luiz and I, you'll remember how much copying and pasting in and out of the browser that was, the models quickly forgetting what they were working on and hallucinating. Eventually, we got to some of those IDE tools like GitHub Copilot, which were doing a little better. They could do inline code generation, but still lacked that awareness of the overall context of the project, which was really the driving factor I think we started to see last year was this transition into agentic coding assistants, which had access to the entire code base and could really drive from context some real meaningful changes to the code. What we're seeing this year, and I think will be the kind of shift into the future, is really hands-off multi-agent workflows where they're really driving from idea to release. So looking at a ticket, identifying what needs to occur in order to implement that ticket, and going all the way into release. Now, we're not there yet, and that's not what we're talking about today. We'll really look at this third column, the agentic workflows. So, yeah, I got ahead of myself. I think this slide kind of covers what I was just talking about. So what we'll focus on today is, I think for Luiz and I, our favorite vibe coding / pairing tool, which is Klein. And so quickly to start, we'll just walk through an overview of Cline. So Cline is a open source AI collaborator for coding. It is best supported right now in VS Code, but I think they've recently started to add and VS Code forks like Windsurf. They've quickly added support for PyCharm, and they keep adding stuff. So to access Cline, you'll just install it as a connector or extension in VS Code. So settings, extension, find Cline, hit install. And to set it up, you will pick the LLM provider of your choice. We found it works best with Claude Sonnet, especially the one recently released optimized for coding tasks. Enter your API key. What's nice is it also works for pass-through proxy tools like Light LLM, which we use it with. So we don't show this, but if you tick that custom base URL, you can enter whatever proxy service you're using and manage the API calls that way. I think a key thing to hone in on here, well, actually, let's do a walkthrough of what you see on the screen when you work with Cline. So at the top here, you can see some pretty standard interface elements. So start a new task. What's nice is it will track the total cost of your session. Up top, we'll see our most recent prompt, as well as how much context you have left in your current session. I think this is something I mentioned earlier with old tools, which was, their easy ability to forget what they're working on. This is something that we faced early on with Cline. I think it's gotten much better at it. So when it reaches that 200,000 token count, it now tries to go back and optimize its past context to be much smaller. But you'll still run into limitations if you're trying to open up a huge JSON file that blows up the context. No good. Some of the key elements to really hone in on the screen, though, are at the bottom here. So you can see where it has auto approval settings. This is where you set up what Cline is able to work on without permission and where you want it to stop and check in before it does something. So there's degrees of thought in terms of how much we should let AI do. So there's, I think a paradigm where you do what I call YOLO coding, or Luiz calls coffee coding, where you tick all the boxes and let Cline do whatever it wants. And then there's people who have nothing ticked and want Cline to ask for permission to do everything. And I think both of those have utility, and we need to find the right balance based on the task we're facing. The other really important component that I want to call out here is the plan act toggle at the bottom. This is in plan mode. This is where you have an opportunity with Klein to really shape the task that you're working on and make sure that you're injecting clear direction and confronting assumptions and clarifying during this step. Because as soon as you hit that act mode, Klein's going to go off and start writing code. And that's where we need to be really careful. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Luiz, who's going to walk through a demo of using Klein on a common problem I think we've all seen.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So as Chris was talking about these permissions and the plan act toggle here, I want to call the attention to these two. Really, this is one of the main reasons why we like Klein. A lot of these coding assistants, they're really similar, right? But we started using Klein and we like it a lot because of these functionality. And I hope that through the demo, we can take a look at it. So I'm gonna stop with the deck here. We're gonna look at the Mars rovers, which many of you may be familiar with this problem. So this is a problem that ThoughtWorks used to use, I believe, for, I don't think we use it anymore, for hiring, in our hiring process and recruiting process. It was like a coding challenge where folks needed to develop it's a simple solution. There's like a rover walking on a matrix that is like a plateau. Imagine like that plateau represents a certain geography in Mars. And then you have commands that you send to that rover, like left, move, left, move, left, move, left, move, move. And then you want to see where the rover ends after this. So this is the exact text as taken from that problem. I just turned that into a prompt. So I copy pasted the problem here, and then I just told, please create a program to solve the problem below, blah, 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 blah.
Luis,
Yes.
sorry, just in case we're still seeing the slides. I don't
Oh,
know if you're, yeah.
sorry about that. Let me share everything. All right. Hopefully you can see the prompt now.
Yeah, now we can see a Google Doc. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, so this is the description of the problem. Like I said, I just copy pasted it and has the problem, an expected input and expected output as an example. And I just here in the beginning, I added some instructions to Klein. Please create a program to solve the problem below, blah, blah, blah. Please use Python. Please include a brief explanation on a README file. I want to call attention to this paragraph here. Before you begin, let's please debrief on how you would solve the problem, what libraries you would use, how would you build the application, manage requirements, what patterns would you suggest? So let's copy this, move to this code. So I have here an empty repository. There's nothing here called Mars rovers. I'm going to change this to plan mode. And on plan mode, Klein is not going to change anything. It's just chatting with me, right? You can see here that I gave it permission to edit files on the project. And this is what Chris was saying, is like he calls YOLO, I call it coffee mode, because it's like you send a prompt, you go grab coffee. When you come back, there's like a whole lot of changes in the repository for you to review, right? So we're gonna start with that. Let's see what it does. And this is an AI interaction. Who knows if it's gonna work or not? We're gonna see. I tried this before, it worked. It's live demo. So as you can see, it is spitting out a lot of stuff here for me. It's telling me, like the design patterns. It's recommending we use commands, state, factory patterns, the implementation here, technical implementation like using Python, blah, 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 blah. So some of the classes that it has identified, Plateau, Rover, Mission Control class. Sounds great. Project structure. Okay, this all sounds good. I'm gonna tell it, okay, can we use poetry, please? All right, this looks good to me, so I'm gonna say, let's do it, and change to act mode. And now it's gonna start editing and creating files. As you can see, it can also run commands, but I didn't give it permission to run commands by default. So it asks me for permission, and I say, fine, go for it. It's detected that it needs to use a specific version of Python. And like I said, I call this coffee mode because this is the moment that I would go grab some coffee, go to the kitchen, prepare my coffee, come back, and maybe it's still working. And this is more akin to the vibe coding type of workflow, right? Where I just told the AI, here's what I want you to do it, right? So it's not pair programming. I think the conclusion that we're kind of jumping ahead here, but so you're being better than poetry. Yeah. I think this discussion, so Carl, it's good that you mentioned that because I think, we're showing Klein here. And to some extension, I think that a lot of this discussion, like, oh, should we be using Klein? Should we be using, Windsurf? Should we be using Cloud Code? I think that I compared that to like, should I be using VI or Emacs? I think that all of these AI coding assistants, they have good and bad things. Just like you can see that UV is better than poetry, right? There's differences, there's advantages and disadvantages. I think the most important thing is we all should be using an AI coding assistant. We truly believe that, and that's part of the message that we want to deliver with this talk. And if we can inspire folks to, if you have not been using an AI coding assistant, if you can inspire folks with this talk to start doing that, I think that's the goal that we want to reach here, whichever one it is. We're using Klein here, but it is whichever one you want to use. I'm hoping that it doesn't take a long time to finish because there's more that we want to show. As you can see, it's also creating tests, even though I didn't tell you to create tests. So it has some kind of in the system prompt, right? It has some kind of like best practices. I also told it to use best practices, right? I didn't say tests specifically. Okay, now let's run the tests. Oh, there was an error. There you go. It even added coverage. You really went the extra mile this time. All right, it's saying that it's done. So we can take a look here. Everything it created. So there's a main file. There's a mission control that parses the input with the commands we want to send to the rovers. gets the output, processes the input file. There's a plateau class that basically validates if a certain position is within the limits of the plateau. There's a rover, an enumeration with the orientation, left turn, right turn, move. Okay. Looks good enough. All right. So the next thing that we wanted to show is, like I said, this is very much like vibe coding style, right? Like it generated a bunch of code. If I come back now with my coffee, now I have to review all of this code. So again, remember we were talking about pair programming, right? So this is not very much like pair programming. This is more like somebody wrote a pull request and then they have to send that pull request for me to review, right? So what we want to do is, for those who are familiar with the Mars rover, usually there is also some kind of extension that we do with the candidates, right? And that extension is here, and it's about like checking that the rovers don't go off limits at the plateau and things like that. So for that extension, I have the prompt here. We have an extension to work on. Before we start, let's devise an implementation plan. Let's copy this prompt. And what I wanted to show is I'm going to remove this edit permission before I send it. Let's see what happens. Oh, I didn't change the plan. Okay. Sorry, I should have changed the plan, and we would discuss first how the implementation would go. So I skipped that step. It's okay because we're running out of time. But now you can see that it's not editing files at will, right? It has one change that it wants to do, and it's showing me that change. And there's a diff here, right? And I see that it's adding these beacons, which is a tuple, add beacon to the plateau, has beacon. Okay, so this I wanted to show because this feels a lot more like pair programming, right? Like first I discuss with the AI what we're gonna do, how we're gonna solve the problem. Then we agree on a strategy and we start the implementation. Each change that the AI is doing, it's giving me the opportunity to say, this looks good, let's move on, right? Where I click save, or I can even come here and make a change, right? To the code here and then save with my change, or I can completely reject and type a feedback here to the AI saying why I don't think this is a good change, right? And then it keeps going. So it's gonna now change, move on to the next change it needs to do to accomplish this task, right? Going back to that slide where we showed how the industry is moving, right? And it's moving more and more towards like completely automating everything. Our experience is that it's not quite there yet. In the future, it might be. But as a pair programming utility like this, we feel like it very much is something that we all should be using because it really feels like having a person that you can pair with and that you can collaborate to get stuff done a lot faster. So you can see here that it added more things. Is lost, it added a flag to the rover saying if this rover is lost or not. And again, I can give it feedback and then change the direction. Sometimes I see that the implementation that starts to go, it's not great. And I'm like, I don't like where it's going. And it's okay that I kind of like restart the task. I throw everything away because everything is version controlled anyways. I throw everything away and I start with a new prompt, right? The same task. This new prompt kind of like refining based on the errors that it was making before. So this is something that is totally okay as well.
I learned yesterday actually, and so this is a complete side comment, but actually if you make comments or changes in the modifiable version that Klein generated on the right, it will immediately acknowledge those back into context as well. So you can change that editable file and it'll consider what changes you've made.
Yeah. So jumping into the best practices, do not forget the plan mode. It is very useful to prime the LLM, plan the implementation strategy. Sometimes you can catch problems with like the libraries it wants to use or the way that it wants to solve the problem. There, I think that there is a room for the YOLO coffee mode vibe coding, right? Very much, again, going back to what ChatGPT said in the beginning, very much when you're thinking about prototyping something, if it's like a greenfield project that you just want to scaffold, something like that, I believe that there is definitely room for that. But on a day-to-day or working on client projects, things like that, the pairing mode, I think, is where a lot of that value comes in. You still think about how to solve the problems as a developer, right? Like, what do I want to refactor? Do I want to extract a method here? Do I want to move this or there? And I can give these instructions to the LLM. So I'm still working on the code level, right? But I am telling the LLM to do all the typing for me, basically, right? So there's definitely gains in productivity there. And the pairing best practices apply here as well, right? Brainstorm with the LLM, do on-the-fly code review as it's doing all the changes. You have that very timely feedback on the changes it's doing, catch those changes right away, adapt to them, give feedback, do some ping pong if needed. And again, like I said, this pair programming style is very relevant for brownfield projects. Do not be afraid to start over. If you see that it's going in the wrong direction, just throw everything away and start again. That's totally fine. It's something that we have done quite a bit. The Klein has a thing called the memory bank. I don't think we're going to have time to cover that, but it is very useful if you have larger projects. It's basically a folder called memory bank, and you add MD files there with context about the project, any of like the patterns that are expected to be followed and things like that, so that every time you start a new task with Cline, you don't have to prime it on the same things every time. It automatically will read those files and know the context. I have an example where I have an application that has a backend and a front end, and I have the architecture with like the contracts of the backend in this memory bank. And when I want to make changes to the UI, I just tell you what I want it to be changed, and then it goes into that memory bank and reads the information about all the architecture and contracts, and I don't need to give all this information to client every time. It's also good for debugging, so if you have errors, ask for help. In our experience, it's very good at like finding problems. You can also ask it for code reviews, right? So if you have a big pull request that you need to review, you can ask Klein for like at least an initial impression of that code review. I have also used it to code review its own code. So I start a new task and I say, hey, this code was developed by like a junior developer. Can you be very strict and review it for me? And it was code written by Klein itself. And very important, don't forget you become responsible forever for code you pushed. So even if it's code generated by the AI, you're pushing that code, you're responsible, accountable for it. So make sure that you review every code that you write or that you write together with the AI, right? And to wrap up, because we're at time, and I see you have comments and questions, we can address that offline if needed. So about the future, if you're a developer, like I said, the main message you want to deliver is this, we really think that this is here to stay. And if you're a developer, if you care about your employment, you should be using this. I think it's very clear that I'm not speaking for Thoughtworks, obviously, but I do think that in the future, even if this technology doesn't advance any more than it is already, it is something that is very important for all of us as developers to learn and be comfortable using them. I have a question that are unit tests even relevant anymore? In my experience using Cline, I think that the relevancy of unit tests has decreased quite a bit. And it almost feels like we're moving, if you think about how compilers moved the needle in terms of like the level of abstraction that we're working on, right? We don't have to write assembly code anymore. We're writing programming, high-level programming code. I almost feel like we're gradually moving towards a direction where programming code is going to also become a level of abstraction we don't deal with anymore. I don't think we're quite there yet, but I can see in the future this becoming much more our work as developers is to think about the architecture, the specification, how you want the systems to work, and then the programming code itself handled by AI coding assistants. I can see that future. Like I said, I don't think it's quite there yet, but I think it's moving towards that direction. If you're not a developer, play with these tools because you can do some vibe coding even if you are not super comfortable programming. I've seen BA sometimes wish that they had a developer to do some prototyping for them so that they could show something to the client, right? Maybe you can do something like that with Klein already. And of course, risks, it's not quite there yet in like completely just letting it do its own thing, we don't think. So an over-reliance on AI may still bring quality security, especially security and performance issues. So be very aware of that. That human in the loop is still very much required. I know we are at time. I have time to stay if folks want to continue discussing, asking questions and things like that. I'd be happy to continue. But thank you very much, everyone else who
Thank
joined.
you all.
If you'd like to chat with Chris and I, feel free to ping us. And if you have more questions about our experiences, and if you want to see some kind of like client work that we have done using Cline, we'd be happy to share. We're fortunate to work with a client that is very bullish when it comes to AI, and they have been supporting us very much in the adoption of these tools. So we'd be happy to share more information. So feel free to reach out.